Okay, so today we have two goals for our session. So up to this point, all of our sessions have been sort of the hard work of actually planning out how to write your paper. And so today I'm just gonna give you some tips, tricks, things to keep in mind as you go from that plan to an actual final paper. And then we'll also have some time for you to consult with your classmates, your peers, to talk about questions, struggles, concerns that you might have as you're going through and listen and learn from one another, get some advice and give some advice, that sort of thing. So now that the preparatory assignments are done, it's time to write your actual paper, which is due next week, right? Hopefully you've kind of already got started on it. But here's the piece from the syllabus. It says, all students will write a research paper that develops a focused argument and conversation with McClendon addressing one of the theological topics we studied in this course. So as we've done in our previous sessions, I'm borrowing heavily. Some might say just using what Turabian says. So this book is really a useful book for you as you try and figure out how to write your paper. There's a lot more in here than just how to cite sources. So if you don't have a copy, you can borrow. We have a couple here, but I would recommend getting a copy for yourself. Okay, so you've done all the planning, bibliography, outline, introduction, all that. You kind of have an idea of where you actually want to go in your paper. And so now it's time to sit down and write. So as you're going through writing your paper, I just have a few things that I want you to keep in mind. So the first piece of advice I have for you is to develop effective writing habits. And so what exactly do I mean by effective writing habits? Well, I can tell you one thing that it's not, which is waiting until the night before it's due and writing the whole thing in one sitting. And then maybe in the morning you have a few minutes to read over it and look for spelling errors, and then you hand it in to Jamie, and that's it. Right. You can do that, but I think your final product will not be as effective as it could be if you do that. A more effective way to do this is to set some time, start early, set several chunks of time aside to work in small, manageable chunks, and give yourself realistic and achievable goals about what you want to do in those chunks of time. So maybe you have a couple hours this afternoon, you sit down and say, I'm going to write the first section, or I'm going to write 1,000 words today. You don't have to do the whole thing, right? But then actually stick to those goals. Make sure you're accomplishing what you set out to accomplish in those time periods. You also don't have to write your paper in order. If you get stuck on the first section, move on to the second and come back and write the first section later when you have a better idea of where you're going with it. It's also important that as you're going, making sure that you are engaging your sources appropriately. And by that I mean quoting, paraphrasing, and summarizing appropriately. Now sometimes it can be hard to know what the difference between these three things is, or when you should use one strategy versus another. So summarizing is when you want to sort of give an overview of another resource's argument, but getting down into the fine-grained details is not so important, right? You don't need to rehash every single point they make, but here's the main argument that they're making. Either that or the source itself has some interesting things to say, but it's not relevant or important enough to warrant giving it a whole lot of space in your final product. So paraphrasing, on the other hand, is you're essentially restating another source's argument or ideas in your own words. And usually we do this either because you feel that you can state their argument more clearly or more concisely than they did, or you want to do this when you find out or you feel that their idea is the important part, but the specific words that they use are not as important. And then finally, we have direct quotations. And there are 4 reasons that you would use a direct quotation in your paper. First is that the specific words that the other author uses are important to your argument. The actual words that they use are important. If the person whose idea you're using is an authority in this particular field, and they're sort of backing up or agreeing with what you're saying, you can use this to say, look, other people agree with me. Here's what this person says about this. You may also find that when you're reading a source, this person conveys their ideas or their argument so compellingly that there's no way you could possibly improve on what they've said or make it any clearer. And so you just want to use their words exactly. And finally, if you find that you are going to disagree with or challenge what another author has said, it can be helpful to include their exact words so that you can be sure that your reader knows that you are not misrepresenting or taking out of context the things that they have said, right? So to be fair to this author that you're disagreeing with, you might include their exact words in your paper.
What? I have a question.
Yeah.
So for the second one, so say, hey, they said this too. How do you distinguish, like, well, this is my argument. They said this too, but what if you got that from them? Like,
Well, then that's their argument.
Right.
Right.
So then why would you ever do that? You're using your argument.
Well, so ideally, you're not just restating the argument of what somebody else has said, right? You're making your own argument and you're saying, this person also has ideas that kind of follow along with what I'm saying, but it's not, you're not just restating the exact same thing.
But
right?
if you did get it from them and you say their argument is this,
Yeah.
I agree with that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So the other thing to keep in mind as you're going is you have to be very careful to avoid plagiarism, right? And we've talked about plagiarism at various points in time. And plagiarism is what happens when you take someone else's work or ideas and pass them off as your own, right? And I think we all know that you can't just go and find like an article or something on the library website and copy and paste it and say, this is my paper, right? We all know that's wrong. But what's easier to do is to plagiarize inadvertently or accidentally, right? And that is still plagiarism, and that's still not okay. So ignorance is not really an excuse in this case. So we have to be really, really careful to make sure that we're giving credit to any ideas that are not our own, right? So one thing you can do is that any time that you are using another author's words, exact words in your paper, even if you go on to cite the source later, you have to signal that it's a quote by using quotation marks. So if you're using the exact wording that another author is using, you have to put it in quotation marks and then you have to cite it. Both of those pieces have to be there together. You can't leave one out. When you're paraphrasing, you can't just take their sentence, change out a few words here and there, rearrange a few things other places. You have to actually put it in your own words, right? So the way the phrase is structured, the way the wording is structured and all of that has to be your own, even when you're paraphrasing. So if you paraphrase too closely, you can really get into trouble if you're not actually putting things in your own words.
And that's even if you cite.
Right, yeah. So ultimately what it comes down to is anytime you're using an idea that's not your own, if you've gotten it from somewhere else, you need to make sure that you're citing it. Now there's some gray area here in terms of, what's common knowledge, what's a unique idea, right? If you're saying Genesis is the first book of the Bible, you don't really need to cite that because anyone who's reading your theology paper is going to know that, right? But if there are more specific ideas that are tied to particular authors or scholars, then you need to make sure you're giving credit where it's due. And finally, it's important to remember that a first draft is not the same thing as a final draft. You'll likely need to review and revise your first draft at least a couple times before you submit it. So make sure you have enough time between when you finish your first draft and when the paper is due to actually go back and make some revisions. Here are a few things to consider as you're making your revisions. First, you want to check for blind spots in your arguments. Have you considered potential counter arguments that your readers might have? Have you looked at evidence that challenges what you are saying, people who disagree with your argument? Have you considered, if you're writing a paper that's heavily based on evidence or research, have you considered alternative ways that that research or evidence might be interpreted? Because your readers will do all of these things as they try to figure out if what you're saying is accurate and compelling. They'll look for reasons that it's not. So you need to try and anticipate that and build that into your writing. Second, you want to make sure the body of your paper is coherent, that it all kind of flows together and makes sense as one unit. It should be easy for your reader to know how each section of your paper relates to the other sections, what role each section plays in the whole paper, and what the main point of each section is. Third, check your paragraphs. Make sure that they are all relevant to the main point of the section in which they appear. Make sure they're relevant to the overall argument that you're trying to make. And once you've done that, it's time to do some final polishing. Read your paper one more time to fix errors in grammar, spelling, punctuation. And on the computer, spell check is a really useful tool, but it is not infallible, right? It will miss things that it should catch. It will catch things that are not really errors. So while you should definitely use it, you should not stop there. Make sure that you're reading through it and checking for errors on your own as well. And finally, it's time to turn it in. And actually knowing when to stop tweaking and writing can be one of the hardest things for writers. You always want a little more time to perfect this and to rearrange and make things a little bit better. But realizing that you are never going to write the perfect paper is a big piece of writing, right? And knowing when the paper is good and meets the requirements and is ready to be handed in is important. So at the end, just look through your paper one last time, make sure it looks the way you want it to, that the page breaks are where they're supposed to be, margins look good, spacing, any tables or figures that you've put in are formatted and in the right place, and then it's time to turn it in. So that's a lot of information. I hope I've given you some good things to think about. Yeah, Jamie?
Can I add two things?
Yeah.
I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
Inclusion there, but can you go back to the plagiarism piece?
Yeah.
So one of the things that I've noticed that occurs most commonly with plagiarism, or one of the excuses I get most frequently is, oh, well, I was taking notes. I was typing out notes, and I cut and pasted some of my notes, and I didn't realize that was a quotation. It was just in my notes that I dropped into my paper. Well, you're responsible for that as well. So I really encourage you, as you're taking notes, to be really as accurate as possible, even in your notebook or your computer file that you're taking notes on, so that you have quotation. If you're using someone else's words, there has to be quotations around it, and there has to be a citation, period. So whatever kind of, Brandon's already said that well, but I just wanted to point out that particular issue because I get that almost every semester. Oh, it was in my notes and I didn't realize it. It's your responsibility to make sure you take accurate notes and that you transfer what you've done in your notes accurately to your paper. That's the one thing. If you can go forward to the next slide. There, the coherence piece. Brandon said something really important. It's about really showing how each part relates to the other. So one of the other things that I see a lot is, you've been working from an outline, so you plug in, well, here's my introduction, here's my next section, here's the next section, but there's never any kind of connection between the sections. They're in your head, of course, because you've been thinking about this for a while, but as a reader, you're like, why am I reading about this person now? Why did we shift from this author to this author? So to be offering reasons for, as we've seen in the previous section, this author argues this. One common criticism of that is that this author, or that this perspective misses this other author, for instance, and then you go on. So the links between the different sections are really important to establish. They can be harder to think about, but thinking about why you're moving between sections can really help you understand what you're actually trying to argue in your paper. So I just encourage you to think about linking the sections, paragraphs of course as well, to make sure there's a coherence within sections, but from transitioning between sections too. It's really important to give a reason for why you're doing what you're doing. So, and just whenever you're in doubt, just think about what would somebody reading this paper who hasn't done all this research think reading this. So try to put yourself in the head of someone who's reading this. And that's how I read it. Obviously, I know you and I've been reading some of the same stuff as you, but I'm trying to read it as if you're giving me an argument and I'm just taking it with the only knowledge I have is what you're putting on the page. So really trying to think about what is the experience of a reader? And as I'm going from this section to this section, what is that reader thinking about why you're moving from this section to that section? So just wanted to add those 2 points.
Yeah, and another piece that I wanted to pop in on too is that as you're doing this process of polishing up your paper, that's where writing services can come in handy. And I think Brandon might talk a little bit more about that, but if you're having questions about like the things that Jamie mentioned, are my transitions good, or various things like that, sending it to writing services. You can send the same paper to us multiple times. We're happy to look at it more than once if you're in the draft stage and then in proofreading later on. So there's resources.
Yeah, I was just going to wrap up by giving a plug for writing services, and just to follow up on what Carl said. Carl and I and our writing services team, Mary Schertz and Tyler Brinkman, are happy to look at papers at any stage in the process. However much or little that you've written, whether you want to come to Carl and me to talk about research, whether you want to talk to Mary about like the actual structure of the paper, whether you want to talk to Tyler about proofreading and transitions and that kind of thing, we're all happy to look at things at any stage along the way. Kind of the most common way that we get things is, here's a draft of a paper that I already wrote, right? But we are happy to take things way before that, and like Carl said, we'll read it 5, 10, 20 times, as many times as you need us to get it to a point where you're happy. So
Maybe not.
well, yeah, hopefully it doesn't take that many times.
It won't take
And I
that.
do think it's important to point out that writing services, I think you've said this before, but writing services will not rewrite your paper. They
Right.
won't even really edit the paper. They might show you some things that you need to work on and encourage you to do that work. But don't expect, sometimes I get papers back and, I give you feedback and point out grammatical issues. Oh, but I sent this to writing centers. It should be fine. But that's not what the writing center does. Writing center helps you think about some of the issues that you can address. Some of the issues, not all of them. Some of the issues to address to improve the paper.
So sometimes in the past, like I'm working on a draft on a paper right now, and right where it's at now is so crappy that I don't even want to send it into writing center.
Okay.
So like, is there something to that, to waiting until it's like?
I mean, you don't have to wait, but you also don't have to turn it in before you're ready, right? It kind of depends on what you're wanting with it. I mean, you can send it in now and say, I'm really struggling, figuring out how to move from this section to this section. Can you help me with that, right? And we can read it and have a conversation about that. And we don't even have to look at grammar and punctuation and all of that, right? If you know that there's issues there that need to be cleaned up. Or you can wait until you're more willing to let someone else see it and say, here's what I struggled with. How does it look now? We don't have like a set structure of how things have to be submitted or when they have to be submitted. We're really here to kind of help you wherever you need us to help you,
Okay.
right?
And I think in some ways it's better to come earlier rather than later, because that gives you more time to make changes. Because like Jamie said, we aren't going to go through and make every change we see that needs to be made. We'll look at one thing and say, hey, you maybe need to fix this throughout your paper. And another thing to do would be to come during like a drop-in session and maybe not even show your paper, but talk through, like, I'm struggling with this idea and how to present it. And that insulates you from having to show your work that you're not ready to show yet, but still have some help with it.
Right, and Tyler does drop-in hours, I think, 3 times a week. I think it's Monday, Tuesday, Thursday.
Yeah.
He has times that you can drop in, and if you can't come to the library at those times, I think you can also connect with them through Zoom or Google Meet and talk to them online that way. So, okay, so any more questions? Okay, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Carl. We've got a short sort of exercise to help you work together to think through some of these questions that you might have as you're actually doing the work of writing. So.